Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Good morning again. Let's begin by going around and introducing ourselves by our first name. And if you're here for the first time, please let us know that. I'm Paul.
I'm Paul.
Chris. Jay. Bill.
Kay.
Susan.
Raphael.
David.
Patrick. Babette. Pam, and Clyde is one of our buddies that live across the hall in our apartment. And this is his first time.
Thank you.
I'm Max. Michael. G. And this is my first time.
Jay.
Jeff. And this is my first time.
No group.
Lee.
Jack.
Jim.
Jim.
Harv. First time Larry.
John.
Ray.
Bob.
Jim.
Peter. Mohan.
Howard.
Robin.
Robert.
I'm Gregory.
Rule. Aaron. Tom.
Well, welcome everybody. Okay. Today our speaker is Nyima Marc Olmsted. I'm reading your abbreviated introduction that I got from the TBM website because I didn't know you could email with your full introduction, so you may fill us in if you'd like to after I introduce you. As a senior student and resident of the San Francisco chapter of the Vajrayana Foundation, last Chance Gonpa. Is that the right pronunciation? Gonpa?
Gonpa.
And he's been a student of Buddhism since 1974 when Allen Ginsberg taught him city practice. In 1995, he completed a 3-year retreat under his current teacher, Lama Tharchin Rinpoche. Oh, Nyima.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here today. The topic is poison and wisdom, emotions and the tantric Buddhist view. So I thought we would start with something a little interesting and exotic, and that'll be a little bit of practice. I know we've just practiced, but we'll actually do a kind of a beginner's visualization. And then we'll have a little talk and a little discussion. What is our timeline here? I have a clock.
Well, we wrap up a little before noon, so we have announcements and we try to end it.
Okay, and then usually how much discussion?
As much as time allows.
All right. Okay. All right. So first of all, as you may have seen on the website, I'm referred to as a senior student. That means I'm not a Lama. I'm associated with the Vajrayana Foundation. I don't really speak for them. My teacher, Lama Tharchin Rinpoche, asks me to wear robes in the context of this sort of situation. So it doesn't mean much more than that, if anything. And so I am not claiming to be any particular big deal. And however, I am authorized to give you this transmission, which is a very brief oral transmission, which is done in order to give a kind of a stamp of approval to doing the practice that we're about to do. Basically, all you have to do is listen to it, and then you will have received it. Usually, you're requested to generate bodhicitta, which I assume you've already done in your wonderful sitting practice. Just to generate the enlightened thought that whatever benefit comes from this practice and this talk is dedicated to the liberation of all sentient beings. So the idea of this oral transmission, or lung as it's called in Tibetan, which basically is just means air quite directly, is that I have heard it and now you will hear it. So in that sense, you're connected with this lineage, the lineage of the Nyingmapa of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the first of the four schools, and in particular Dudjom Rinpoche, one of the major teachers of that lineage. So it's very brief. It's called the 7-line prayer, and again, all you have to do is listen, and then we'll actually practice it. Hung organ yugi nujam sam pema gesa dombola yatsin chuki nudrumne pema jungne shesu drakoru kandro mambo gogegi jesu dadurgi jingi lobje shesu so guru pema siddhi hung oma hung benzu guru pema siddhi hung. Then this is the dedication of merit. It's just a formal dedication prayer. Sonam di tamchezik padni tomne nepeda nam pamje shinge and the jimalung drupai sibesele droa sho. So we're done. This practice and this prayer is associated with this historical figure, which miraculously may stay up for the duration of my talk with the masking tape that I put up. That's Guru Rinpoche, also known as Padmasambhava. He brought Tantric Buddhism from India and established it in Tibet. And these were his allies in Tibet, the king, and also this scholar. That's King Dritsen Detsen, and this is Sankarit Shita. But at any rate, the visualization we're going to do is just of this figure, Guru Rinpoche, who is basically your inner teacher and also your inner wisdom. So it can be associated with any teacher you have a connection with. And of course, he is a historical figure, but there's a long-standing visionary tradition of Guru Rinpoche appearing. It's not required that you have any faith in Guru Rinpoche. It's just one of those things that happened a lot to people who were associated with that tradition. They had this vision of Guru Rinpoche. So he was not considered a god or any sort of entity, but more of a principle or manifestation of enlightened mind. So you're not supposed to regard him as any kind of savior, or, you're the newest Jesus on the block or anything like that. However, you just listen to this melody, and then I'll describe. You can imagine Guru Rinpoche in the sky, looking like this, if you can see him. And then I'll describe what happens, and we'll sit briefly, and then we'll have a little talk. So this is a traditional invocation of Guru Rinpoche. Om Jesu Guru Rinpoche to your heart, imagine a 5-colored light. And I will repeat his mantra aloud, and then hopefully you'll pick up a little bit of what it sounds like. Anyone actually interested later in following this practice, I have brought some paper on that. You can ask me for it. I'd be happy to give it to you. But for the time being, just imagine this light coming, and this is the mantra of Guru Rinpoche. Om Ahum Benzra Guru Pema Siddhi Hum. 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 Now imagine from Guru Rinpoche's forehead a white light going to your forehead, and this purifies all aspects of body. All the nerves and channels are completely purified. Then a red light from his throat goes to your throat, and this purifies all inner winds or chi. Then a blue light from his heart goes to your heart, and this purifies all vital essence. And then a small rainbow-colored ball shoots from his heart into your heart, and this completely communicates his activity. And then finally Guru Rinpoche dissolves into a thumb-sized rainbow ball of light and comes over your head and descends through the crown of your head and into your heart, where you and Guru Rinpoche dissolve completely into light. And we will rest there briefly, considering ourselves inseparable from this primordial wisdom. Then we return and we dedicate this merit to the liberation of all sentient beings. In the Tibetan tradition it sounds like this. Sunam di tamjesi padne tamen peda lambam jeshin gegan ji malam grubai sibe sale dwa dwa sho. So the idea of visualization and mantra is not really any different from the use of attention to the out-breath or counting of the out-breath. It's just a form of support for the mind, and the tantric tradition uses visualization and mantra very extensively, but ultimately it is a mental exercise, and the highest form of Tibetan Buddhist teaching and philosophy is formless, so goes beyond any sort of visualization. So it's not as alien as it may seem right off the bat. Its purpose, it's interesting because, Ginsberg's guru, Trungpa Rinpoche, died, and then he met Gelek Rinpoche, who's still alive and is Philip Glass's teacher. And Gelek Rinpoche asked him what his practice was, and he was still doing shamatha, attention to the out-breath dissolving into space, according to Trungpa Rinpoche. And Gelek Rinpoche asked him, how are you going to follow your breath in the bardo? Which was basically, after death, where was the support going to be for one's awareness? So that is one of the practicalities of visualization or mantra. Now, ultimately, if awareness itself is the support in one's practice, there's not really an issue. But if one is completely attached to the breath, then with the absence of breath, there is the possibility of some confusion when there is no breath. So that being said, that was sort of Ginsberg's immediate teaching on beginning visualization. And in particular, the tantric tradition, and tantra is a buzzword today, as I've seen, probably some of you saw in the email. It's often associated with some sort of sexual yoga, and sexual yoga is a component, although it's not something that you would ever learn in a weekend workshop that says tantra in it, I'm afraid. But tantra itself is a word that means continuity. And basically, that means the continuity of emptiness and form inseparable, which is something I think most of us are familiar with from the Prajnaparamita Sutra. But it also means inseparability of what we call samsara, the world of ignorance, and nirvana, and various other kinds of separations like the sacred and the profane and this sort of thing. The world, the flesh, and the devil and the spirit, this kind of thing. So the relief of Vajrayana Buddhism is that the flesh and the spirit are not enemies. And this is not a license for indulging oneself or acting out, but it is a path that talks about using the emotions. Basically, they identify either 3 or 5, the 3 being aggression, which we also know as anger, passion, which is probably a little clearer as grasping or sometimes lust, but grasping is particularly good because I think that really shows the problem of that emotion, that there is a clinging involved with desire, and not so much the energy of desire, but the rejection of something else or the attachment to one thing. And then ignorance, which is one that we're all familiar with. Those are the 3, and then they sometimes add jealousy and pride. Now, all of these have, in the Tibetan tradition, they have flip sides. They have wisdom aspects, which are sometimes talked about in terms of the 5 Buddha families, so that the situation of ignorance in its neurotic form, when transformed, becomes the Buddha family itself. All of these are Buddha families, so you could say this is the Buddha family, which is a little confusing, so we'll just say Buddha family. So in other words, the neurotic form is to be spaced out, and the wisdom form is completely spacious and aware. So it's a clear empty space, absolute reverse of being spaced out and not knowing what's going on. The reverse of the grasping of passion is what they call discerning wisdom. So it's literally the non-neurotic element of passion, which is always picking out what's best, what's most attractive, and actually turning it in a wisdom sense, when there's no longer a self involved, into a real clarity of discernment. And anger becomes mirror-like wisdom, because anger has a real penetrating, sharp, and clear element. I think probably most of us know sometimes that when you're totally furious, there is an experience suddenly where you feel absolutely awake sometimes in the middle of that anger. That's like in fact, that's sometimes the intoxication of anger. But when that is transformed, that becomes mirror-like wisdom. And jealousy is, also similar to paranoia. It's a kind of poverty mentality. It's based on the notion that there's something you're not going to get that someone else has. That's usually the aspect of jealousy. Or paranoia, that somehow, even if you don't see it, that it's going to be taken away from you, or in some way somebody's going to get something that you're not going to get, or even in, let's say, the case I've known in neurotically relating to my own Buddhist practice, that somehow I'll get the information incorrect and it won't work and this sort of thing, and that somebody else will get enlightened and I won't get enlightened, and so it can be applied in that way too. And but as William Burroughs said, paranoia is having all the facts, and so in that sense, that's a good bridge to understanding the wisdom aspect of jealousy, which is all-accomplishing wisdom. It is already accomplished from the viewpoint of wisdom, because you have all the facts, so it's completely accomplished. You have that kind of when jealousy or paranoia becomes spacious and there's no longer a self, then it's all-accomplishing activity. And then finally, pride becomes a Vajra pride. It becomes equanimity wisdom, which is there's no longer anyone who is not separate from you. There isn't any you, so there's no longer any jockeying for position and being the best. Literally, the entire situation is the best. So the Vajra pride, pride of self, evaporates into a larger equanimity, the literal kind of opposite of pride, and yet at the same time, as you can see, it's basically just pride without any boundary. So I don't think it's particularly necessary to practice visualization for this to be part of one's Buddhist practice. Everyone knows what it's like to have emotion rise in their practice while they're sitting, but of course there are different attitudes about it. Vajrayana Buddhism, according to the Tibetans, is basically, if you can relate to Hinayana and only Hinayana, then that's the practice for you, the so-called lesser vehicle, which of course no one who practices Theravadan would ever refer to themselves as Hinayana. And it's not really meant to be pejorative, because Tibetan Buddhism is based on those initial Pali Canon teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. This is not rejecting that in any way. So it's like a kind of a foundation. And then from there, Mahayana can be introduced, and of course the biggest departure from Hinayana is beginning to talk about phenomena itself as being empty. It's not something that you see in the Pali texts. It refers to the self being empty, but phenomena is not regarded as, it's not really pointed out as being empty of any kind of essential nature, any sort of solidity of any kind. And of course, it also introduces the Buddhas as cosmic figures rather than a man who became enlightened, who happened to hit upon this technique, and begins to say things like Buddha really appeared in order to teach rather than happen to accidentally enlighten himself, and introduces the idea of bodhicitta, or awakened heart or enlightened thought, the idea that we do our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings, and the bodhisattva, that no longer do we pass just into nirvana for permanent time, but actually return to help all sentient beings. And then beyond that, when you get into the tantric tradition, and then they start doing things like visualizing themselves as deities and introducing deities that are locked in ecstatic union, and things start to get a little wilder. And we have some examples of ways in which emotion was dealt with in these traditions. The most recent one that I can think of that I particularly like, when Suzuki Roshi died, one of the Sangha members of the Zen Center described how everyone was, sitting very, very soberly and in a samurai-like way, and determined not to let these emotions sway them, even though it was a terrible tragedy. And Trungpa Rinpoche, whom I think most of you have probably read, was very close with Suzuki Roshi, and he came to speak to the Sangha. And he said, "Today we have not only lost a great teacher, but a great friend." And he began convulsively sobbing up on the podium. And this gave permission for the entire Sangha to begin sobbing. So it was a very, very emotional and cathartic experience. And I think in a lot of ways shows at least where Trungpa Rinpoche was coming from in terms of how to deal with this kind of emotion. And it wasn't weakness, that it wasn't giving in to something that was illusion, but it's really the how of it, not so much the what of it, in terms of how one does that. And in a similar way, there's a story about the tantric master Marpa, who was the head of one of the heads of the Kagyu tradition. That's actually the tradition that Trungpa Rinpoche held the lineage of. And Marpa was also the teacher of the very well-known Saint Milarepa. And Marpa had a son that he was cultivating, and there were certain transmissions that his son was getting that only his son held. And then his son was involved in a terrible accident on a horse and hit his head, and he died. And Marpa had the appearance of being really broken up about this, and he was weeping uncontrollably, and this completely flipped out his students. They thought, this is who we've been following. Now look at him. He's a mess. And so they said to him, Rinpoche, precious one, you told us everything was an illusion. And Marpa's reply, at least according to Evan Vence's tradition, was, yes, but my son's death is a super illusion. So, this sort of thing may seem very perplexing. Now, I remember in particular in my own case, we were visited in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where the main Vajrayana Foundation Center is, by my teacher's teacher, Dungzi Tinli Norbu Rinpoche, who's the son of Dujum Rinpoche. And he was quite a cipher to me. I didn't know what to make of him, and so this was very confounding to me because, for instance, I've been trained to regard, all sounds are mantras. That was one way of regarding noise during practice, and not to regard noise as an obstacle. But everyone was tiptoeing around where Dungzi Rinpoche was staying. Don't bother him, whatever you do. And everyone was going to enormous measures to keep from making any noise around his compound. And I kept hearing this over and over again. So this was like almost a koan for me. Like, well, here is this teacher being held up as like, the teacher's teacher, and he seems to be irritated by noise. So what's going on here? What's the story here? And this really got to me and ate at me and ate at me and ate at me because I just couldn't make any sense out of it. And then finally, literally weeks went by, and I was walking with my teacher, and I said to him, with Dungzi Rinpoche, is it that there is irritation, but no one is irritated? And he said, exactly. And this completely blew my mind. Now, if that doesn't make any sense, then we go back to, talking about Trungpa Rinpoche crying or Marpa crying, that if they were enlightened, that there is crying, but there is no one there who is crying. There can be laughing, but there is, if they are enlightened, then there is no self there that is laughing. There are many stories of what they call the wrathful Lama. There are a lot of Lama stories, and it goes also, you see this a lot in the Zen tradition, where they behave quite wildly and smash things and hit people and do all these things and appear to be very, very angry. And so, if in fact they are who they are supposed to be, then the only explanation is there is the appearance of anger, but there is no one there who is angry. So what this has to say for us as practitioners, I think, is that emotions are not really the problem. The problem is, of course, we knew all along, really, was the notion of a self. But I think it's really easy for us to forget this as practitioners and be very ashamed of anger and lust and jealousy and pride, and we go through all kinds of permutations, and I certainly include myself in this, to avoid looking at these aspects of ourselves. If we're honest, sometimes it can go in the direction of self-loathing, and if we're not honest, then sometimes it can go in the direction of spiritual pride that has nothing to do with that Vajra pride that we're talking about, like an actual disdain for another practitioner who seems to be emotional. Like, oh, well, they obviously haven't gotten that one together. They're still showing irritation. I really thought they were beyond that. Poor devil, I'll have to pray for him extra hard. But I think this is really, really, really good news. The general Hinayana approach is some sort of restriction of emotion, to basically just not to act out. I mean, if you can get away with that, you're doing very well, and frankly, that's good advice. The Mahayana advice is some sort of antidote. For instance, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the practice of Tonglen, of taking and sending. This is a way of bringing one's own suffering to the path, of breathing in one suffering and all the suffering of other beings that are similar to that suffering, and exhaling compassion. There's an actual technique like this. I don't want to even try to go into that. I'm sure if you've read any Pema Chodron, you've come across it. And again, this is not to say that's a bad technique. But even with Pema Chodron, her emphasis is still, even when Trungpa Rinpoche introduces the very simplest of breathing exercises, he's still doing it from this vast tantric view. It's his view is incredibly spacious and vast, so it always winds up being from that viewpoint, regardless of the technique. So, for instance, when Pema Chodron talks about how to deal with emotion on the cushion, one of her advices is to cut the storyline. She uses that phrase again and again. And so it's just a way of gently reminding ourselves, whatever we've lost ourselves into, whatever daydream, fantasy scenario we've lost ourselves into, that in fact there's an underlying energy or emotion that is going along with it, whether it's agitation or lust or excitement, or even anticipating what you're going to do when you get off the cushion, or any of this. And so the notion of making friends with oneself is not to reject the underlying emotion. In fact, to try and stop that, or put some sort of tourniquet on it, or create an obstacle for it, will probably intensify it. And at the same time, it's not necessary to be ashamed of these particular aspects of our emotional world, but that it can be identified as some sort of more fundamental emotional energy, rather than I really want to punch my boss in the face, or I really want to have sex with so-and-so, or what will happen if I lose my job, or this sort of thing. That in fact the underlying emotion is much more important than the storyline. And the sooner that we can be present with that underlying emotion, the sooner that there can be some sort of exhaustion and friendliness shown towards that part of ourselves, and a general relaxation. So the whole notion, I think, of the Buddhist path, from whatever tradition, is a sense of making friends with ourselves, of not fighting with ourselves, so that from the viewpoint of emotions, we don't have to deny them, nor do we have to act out on them. We just have to be aware of them, and that they are not, from the tantric view, even defilements. They are just energy, no different than the primordial energy of wisdom itself, and in fact is divided in the tantric tradition into 5 aspects of that primordial wisdom. So it's just an attitude, really. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to embrace visualization as part of your practice in order to have this view. And personally, it's been a great relief to me, and that is the main reason that I wanted to talk about it today. So if there's any discussion or questions or anything, I'll certainly try to answer, but I think it's better to have a discussion, really. If you have any sort of thoughts on the matter, I think we could have some Socratic dialogue.
A very specific personal question. I have some interest in Guru Dragpur, Dragpur, and I don't know why, but I've Googled them. There's a Tanka available. There are various groups in Europe, but they're all esoteric. That is, you have to have an initiation or something like that before you can open up that group. I've sent them emails, but never get any answer. There's several books. You can't go pamphlets. You can't buy them unless you have Euro dollars or want to go to all the trouble. Does that at all familiar to you?
Is it Guru Drakpo, like Drakpo?
there were several spellings. D-R-A-G-P-U-R is the one that I see most, but you obviously know more about that.
Well, it could be the same.
Big bird-like god. It looks a little like Garuda, a yidam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That, as I understand, that form it's kind of a generic term for a wrathful aspect of Guru Rinpoche. The particular bird-like one, I don't know, probably associated with that lineage. But I don't think it's that hard to come across that sort of what they call empowerment. You see, we had there are three basic parts of undertaking Vajrayana visualization practice. We've had what's called the lung, or oral transmission. There's the empowerment, which is known as the wang. And then there's the explanation, which is similar to what we did when we described how to do the visualization, which is called the tree. So I don't think it should be all that hard.
Is there something about the wrathful quality, you go through that and beyond it, and it's a highly evolved form of intelligence? There's some kind of that may be what something is trying to tell me, is that forget the surface aspects of the wrath and go beyond to it, and to see what it's trying to tell me about some extraordinarily high vision of intelligence.
Well, I think, one of the aspects of the Vajrayana tradition, when you look at the deities, so-called, I remember Taisitu Rinpoche said, I don't much like this word deity. I prefer the word manifestation of enlightened mind. And then he said, but I'm afraid we're stuck with it, in terms of translation. But they are separated into peaceful and wrathful categories. And peaceful we're familiar with, like Chenrezig, Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara. They're all the same in different countries, representing the same bodhisattva of love. Wrathful, you really only see in the Tibetan tradition. They usually involve flames, and they look quite demonic and are incredibly frightening to any Christian who might see you practicing, and and probably if things keep going the way they are in this country, I may be in jail in 20 years for doing it at all, but. This aspect of wrath is a very interesting element, and it's kind of, for lack of a better word, and a kind of simplistic way of putting it, it's kind of like tough love, but tough love towards ego. The practice is all about like just completely shaking up the ego's position. So you can only do so much of like nice ego. Yes. Now you're behaving yourself and everything is going along fine. Oh yes, you're slowly dissolving, and and the ego says, yes, that's right, I am. I'm doing very well. And then you introduce this practice which has the appearance of that's very shocking. Often they're naked, and clasping a consort, and look like something that if it were in a movie would be really, like, my God, you could have it coming down the streets and overturning the tanks and the police cars, but it's really no different from this same primordial wisdom. It just has a particular kind of flavor or energy. And I think probably, I don't claim to really know, but I think your draw is that there is something, there's something about that kind of practice which really gives permission for anger without it being acted out or repressed, and it winds up having a kind of deliciousness that we often know really when we're really furious. There's a certain point where you go like, my God, this feels great. I mean, before the crash and the incredible guilt, it's like, I'm totally self-righteous. This feels fantastic. I'm finally telling them off and this sort of thing. But beyond that, the energy itself is this, it's an incredible energy. It's much like the energy of lust. It's probably only second to lust in terms of the real power of this sort of energy. And so this kind of practice works with that energy. And Guru Dragpo is a wrathful aspect of Guru Rinpoche. There are many wrathful aspects of Guru Rinpoche, and probably many forms that use this term Guru Dragpo, because I've seen it, and they'll have like what they call a purba body, which is like a three-sided dagger body, and then it'll have a demonic upper part. I haven't seen this bird part, but that all of these visualizations come from visions. So these traditions all have a visionary aspect, much like the Native American tradition. There's a very strong shamanic element to Tibetan Buddhism, especially because it also combined with the indigenous religion of Tibet, which is known as Buddhism. So a lot of, like for instance, this drum here, this is actually 2 human skulls. Now I assume that they died of natural causes, but there's a lot of interest in that sort of thing. The charnel ground and thigh bone trumpets and skulls holding, half skulls holding alcohol and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff, which is, of course, one of the reasons that I got so interested. I was raised on horror movies, and it's just like, all right, this is like, it's a lot more interesting than Catholicism. So that's, I would continue looking into it, because I think you'll find.
Suddenly seeing this is trying to tell me something about my own inner side.
Probably.
That I haven't fully accepted because it's so ugly. I mean,
Yes, they are like that, and also, probably a lama would say you have some previous connection also with this practice. That would be something that they would.
The 3 eyeballs.
Yes, that's very common with the wrathful appearance. 3 eyeballs, yeah.
And black, usually a dark.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
You were talking about the flip side of the anger being some kind of mirror wisdom?
Mirror-like wisdom, yeah. Yeah, that's. I also had a lot of trouble with that for a long time, as to how could that be. How is anger have anything to do with a mirror-like quality? But one time in particular, when I got angry, there was a part of me that I realized had enormous clarity in that moment. It was like an incredibly spacious quality to it. Not enough for me to actually transform that anger, but enough to suggest to me what that mirror-like quality might be. So my advice would be just next time you're angry, just see if you can also look into it a little bit and see what quality the energy might have beyond the what did you say, Sturm und Drang, is that right? That there may be something underneath it that actually does have a very bright, clear, precise quality. And I think that may be more of a door into what that might mean. That's how I found it. But I know what you mean, that at first it didn't seem to have any connection at all. So I don't think I could say more than that.
When you talk about the 5 emotions resolving or finding a resolution or their transformation in aspects of wisdom, I'm curious about the non-duality that I've been reading about recently of compassion and wisdom, and as it was defined in this I thought was good. I'm just interested in your view on it. The wisdom is the seeing through of the illusion of self, the realization of no self. But the compassion that makes it non-dual is the realization that the experience of self among unenlightened sentient beings is so powerful that it constitutes a reality for them, an internal reality. And so that the no self and the self have to be always, that the wisdom is what sees through it, but the compassion is what holds that space for all the beings for us to suffer.
I like what you said. I think what is often said from the viewpoint of there not actually being any sentient beings, is that this sort of compassion that exists on the level of a Buddha, it is said, believe me, I know nothing of it, is a kind of a compassion without object. It's almost like the sun shining. There's no longer any poor sentient being, nor is there any enlightened Buddha. There's no longer a subject, there's no longer an object, there's no longer even an activity known as compassion. But one definition that I've heard, which is of course extremely dry, but for this because it's a kind of a paradox, right? How can there be, what I'm hearing underneath your remark is that you basically are looking for how can one maintain compassion in a clear empty space in which there isn't any sentient being, isn't that kind of cold? But the phrase for compassion is sometimes translated as energetic responsiveness. Now, this is not one of my favorites because it is very chilly, but it's basically a way of trying to work with the notion of compassion not having an object and yet continuing, so that, it's kind of like, for instance, in our experience, when we meet somebody and we have some sort of friendliness towards them, initially there is openness, and then there's some sort of recognition, and then there's some sort of generosity or warmth towards them. So in this bigger picture, this warmth no longer has any sort of object. It just radiates that. That's just what it does. And it's sort of like there's not even any choice anymore. But you could see that would certainly help with any problem of equanimity, because there's no longer anybody to particularly evaluate as being worthy or unworthy, or good student, bad student, or unredeemable, or etc. There's absolutely without any. In fact, again, Ginsberg told a very interesting story. There was the Hindu tantric master Muktananda. And Muktananda, usually the Hindus and the Buddhists are not particularly tight. But Muktananda was very close with the 16th Karmapa, and which was always a very interesting story. It was one of the great masters, the head of the Kagyu lineage. And there's supposedly a picture, I haven't ever seen it, but I've heard about it many times, of the two of them walking together on the beach holding hands. I'd love to see this picture. But Ginsberg was involved with Muktananda for a short period of time, and he described being in his room with Muktananda, and Muktananda was handing out, what was called prasad, or blessed cookies. And he was handing them out to the students, and there was Donald Duck on the television, and he kind of went like this, and he offered it to Donald Duck on the television. And Ginsberg, it completely blew his mind, he said. It was like he really didn't have any separation, He says, okay, and Donald Duck, here's your cookie, and it just was no separation at all. So I think in a lot of ways that's a good example. But Then again, maybe not.
Nyima, thank you. We really should stop the
Okay.
part of the discussion here. Would you be available and hang around a little bit in case there is some...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Can we dedicate the merit to all sentient beings?
Well, we'll have announcements,
Oh.
and then I'll ask you to do that.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
We close by standing up in a circle, and then we have the dedication of merit. So,
Wonderful.
thank you. So, on with the announcements.
In September, the GBF will have its annual retreat. Registration is now open, and the registration form is available outside. The date is from September 16th through 18th. So if you have any questions about the retreat, please come see me after. Thank you.
My name is Peter, and I am the host today, the late host. I apologize for being late. But there will be tea and cookies afterwards. For those of you who are new, we have no maid service here, so if you have tea, we request that you wash your cup afterwards. And there'll be different kinds of sweets out there as well. Please help yourself. We have a Dana bowl, which is for contributions to the upkeep of the organization. And I think the suggested donation now is $5 to $8. Is that right? What we say? More of you want to, less if you can't afford it. It's voluntary. It's a voluntary donation, but we do like to remind people that we have costs and we appreciate your contribution. For newcomers, we have different kinds of sign-up sheets, and I will go and check after the meeting and make sure they're out there. If you'd like to receive our mailing list in your mailbox, we have a list for that. We also have email notices that we send out, and the newsletter can be sent by email. So if you want to give us one or both of your addresses, if you wish to be in contact with the organization, please fill out that mailing list form. Thanks.
My name is Gregory, and I invite any of you who are interested still until September 11th. The Tibet exhibit will be at the Asian Art Museum. I'm offering tours if anyone is interested. I compute, it doesn't cost you anything. It's part of my practice. I also invite anybody who's interested to a Wednesday night Dharma study, which is at my house. This week we'll be discussing Vesantara, which was the life of Buddha just before his life as Gautama Siddhartha, and it represents generosity and Dhamma.
Just to add some short films to that exhibit too. The ones of the some of the major temples in Lhasa. I just wanted it's a chance to visit Tibet in a way if you never go. And there's another one on Tibetan art. Those visuals are absolutely great.
Is it free this week?
Pardon?
The first Tuesday.
First Tuesday.
I suggest, though, if you want to go and you want it to be cheap, go on Thursday evening after 5. It's $5. The Tuesdays are so crowded, it's really not possible to see the exhibit.
If you're really interested, I can meet you there and get you in free if you're on a room like
Okay. And in regards to the address thing for the newcomers, please put your complete information. We're going to be starting to collect data for a GBF member directory. So it would be helpful if you did that. More shall be revealed in terms of the directory in a couple of weeks. David, you have an announcement?
Yeah, I'm channeling George Hubbard, who says tapes are available online at gaybuddhist.org, recordings of these Dharma talks. Also, if anyone is interested in hosting potluck, please talk to me anytime in the next few months. So let's get that going.
Okay, and would somebody volunteer to circulate with the Dana Bowl? Robin? Would you? You want to go?
I'm staying with
Okay. Okay, so I guess that's it. So we get in the circle, and I give us a
this merit, whatever merit we have accumulated today, we dedicate to the liberation of all sentient beings.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.